There is an ant walking along a branch this morning that has been dead for about 3 weeks, and it does not know it yet. It is still feeding, still grooming, still answering the traffic on the trail, and every one of those movements is being paid for by something that is not the ant. Roughly 40% of the muscle inside its body no longer belongs to it. It belongs to a fungus. And that fungus has been growing through this animal one fiber at a time for 20 days. The ant is not sick in the way you are picturing sickness. It is occupied. And in about 4 hours, it is going to climb to a very specific place, bite down once, and stop. Because that is the moment the thing inside it has been building toward since the day it got in. This looks like a disease killing an insect, and it is not. It is a takeover of a functioning machine by something that cannot build a machine of its own. And it runs that machine right up to the edge of collapse, without letting it collapse. The fungus did not evolve to kill this ant. Killing is the cheap part. It evolved to keep the ant alive and moving long after it has stopped being the ant, because a working body is worth far more to it than a dead one. Stay to the end, because the last thing that happens today is not the death, and it is the only part that decides whether any of this was worth it. Here is the whole thing first, and then we take it apart. On day 0, a single spore lands on the back of a worker ant on the forest floor and sticks. Within a day, it has drilled through the outer shell and is inside, in the fluid, where the immune system should end it, and does not. For the next 2.5 weeks, the ant goes to work exactly as it always has, while the thing inside it grows and does almost nothing you could see from the outside. Then, in the final 48 hours, the behavior breaks. The ant leaves the trail, leaves the colony, climbs the stem of a plant, stops at a height it has no reason to choose, clamps its jaws onto a vein on the underside of a leaf, and locks there. And several days after it is dead, a stalk grows out through the back of its head, and the whole thing starts again. The ant is a carpenter ant, and we will call her Zola, because it is easier to watch a name than a number. She weighs a few thousandths of a gram. She is one of tens of thousands of workers in a colony living inside a rotting log. And on any normal day, she is one of the most reliable pieces of equipment that colony owns. She can carry many times her own weight. She can navigate half a mile of trail by scent and light. And she will do it over and over, without rest, until she wears out. She is not an individual in the way we are. She is a working part, and the colony treats her as one, and so, as it turns out, does the thing that is about to move in. The other player has no name and barely has a body, and that is the first thing to understand about it. It is a fungus in the genus Ophiocordyceps, and in its free-living form it is almost nothing. It is a spore and a thread. It cannot hunt, cannot move toward anything, cannot choose a direction, and cannot survive for long exposed on the open floor of a forest. It has no muscles, no nerves, no eyes, and no way to get to the one place it needs to be, which is high up on a leaf in humid, still air. Everything it needs, an ant already has, so it does not build any of it. It takes an animal that already works and redirects the work. Now the number that explains the entire relationship, because everything else comes out of it. Building a body is the most expensive thing anything does in biology. A working insect is the product of a whole colony's food, warmth, and time assembled over weeks. The fungus has none of that. It has a spore, which is a package of instructions with almost no resources attached. So it faces a simple piece of arithmetic. It can spend years and enormous energy trying to grow its own way up to the right height, exposed and defenseless the whole time. Or it can hijack a machine that climbs, feeds, and defends itself, and was paid for by somebody else. It chose the second option about 48 million years ago, and it has been refining the theft ever since.
The detail on this
And you can see how old that arithmetic is because it is written into fossils.
Preserved in the shale.
There are leaves preserved in stone from around 48 million years ago that carry the exact scars a dying ant leaves when it bites down in its final hour. The same mark in the same place on the underside of a leaf, made by an animal doing the same forced thing tens of millions of years before there was anyone to watch it. This is not a strange new disease.
It is one of the oldest business models on the planet, and it was working long before the ant Zola belongs to existed in its current form. So look at what the fungus actually acquires the moment it gets inside, because it is not buying a meal, it is buying an asset. It gets legs that already know how to walk, and a nervous system that already knows how to steer them. It gets jaws that already close hard, an immune system it has already learned to hide from, and a shell that keeps the weather out. It gets, above all, altitude on demand, delivered by an animal that will climb on command without the fungus ever having to grow a single millimeter upward on its own. A spore that lands on the floor is at the bottom of the forest with no way up. A spore that lands on an ant has just acquired a climbing machine with a full tank of fuel. But an asset that expensive comes with a rule, and the rule is the whole reason this is so precise. You cannot strip the machine for parts on day one because a machine stripped for parts stops working. If the fungus simply ate the ant the way a normal infection would, it would be left standing on a corpse on the forest floor, exactly where it started, with no way up and no way out. The value of this ant is not the protein in it. The value is that it still runs. So the entire problem the fungus has to solve is how to consume an animal without stopping it from functioning until the exact second functioning is no longer needed. It has to keep the lights on in a building it is quietly demolishing. And that is why the first 2.5 weeks look like nothing at all. For most of the infection, Zola does her job. She forages, she follows the trail, she takes her turn, and nothing about her behavior tells the colony that anything is wrong. Inside, the fungus is growing as a scatter of separate cells drifting in her body fluid, not as a solid mass. And there is a reason for that too. Growing as loose single cells lets it spread through her without seizing up the parts it is spreading through. It is threading itself into the tissue without knotting the tissue. It is being a quiet tenant in a building that is still fully occupied. And it is being quiet on purpose, because the day the landlord notices is the day the whole scheme can end early. Because the colony is not passive, and this is the pressure the fungus is really working against. Ants are one of the most aggressive anti-infection systems in nature, not as individuals, but as a group. They groom each other constantly. They pull sick workers away from the brood. And a colony that detects one of these infections will carry the affected ant far out of the nest and abandon it before it can become a source. So the fungus is not just hiding from one ant's immune system, it is hiding from the surveillance of the entire colony, which is watching every worker for exactly the signs it is trying not to show. The long quiet phase is not patience. It is concealment under an alarm system that never sleeps. Now put a number on what that concealment is costing the ant, even while she still looks normal. By the end, close to half of the total mass inside her body is fungus, not ant, and a large part of that is grown directly into and around her muscles. Her muscle fibers are being invaded at the level of the individual cell, wrapped and infiltrated by a network of fungal threads that sit between the fibers like a second nervous system laid over the first. She is still moving those muscles,
But increasingly, she is moving them through a layer that is not hers, and that layer is beginning to decide when they fire. The machine still runs. It is just no longer entirely the machine's own hand on the controls. And here is the detail that turned this from a horror story into a genuine scientific problem. Because for a long time, everyone assumed the obvious thing. The obvious thing is that the fungus reaches the ant's brain and drives it from there, like a hand inside a puppet. When researchers reconstructed an infected ant in full, cell by cell, at the moment of the death grip, they found the fungus wrapped through the muscles throughout the body, densely, everywhere. And they found almost none of it in the brain. The brain was largely left alone. Whatever is steering this animal is not doing it by seizing the control room. It is doing it from the muscles outward. And that is a stranger and more unsettling kind of control than a hand in a puppet. So the current best description is not mind control in the way the word suggests. It is something closer to cutting the wires to the driver. The fungus does not need to convince the brain to do anything. It can bypass the brain and act on the muscles directly, contracting them, locking them, and taking the ant's body out of the ant's own hands, one instruction at a time. The brain may still be trying to run the animal it has always run. It is just no longer connected to a body that is listening. The ant is not being persuaded to climb, the ant is being driven by a thing that has quietly rerouted the controls, while the original driver is still sitting there, issuing orders into a wire that has been cut. Which brings us to the final 48 hours, and the part where the behavior breaks in public. Zola leaves the trail. This alone is close to unthinkable for a forager, because the trail is the entire structure of her working life, and she does not simply walk off it. She goes to the base of a plant, and she begins to climb, upward, away from the dark floor where her colony lives, and toward the light, which is the opposite of where a healthy worker of her kind spends her time. She is not lost. She is being taken somewhere, and the place has been specified in advance with a precision that is the most chilling number in this entire story. Because it is not just up, it is a specific set of conditions, hit again and again across thousands of infected ants. The classic death sites cluster at a particular height above the forest floor, often around 10 inches or so on the north side of a stem, in the zone where temperature and humidity sit in a narrow band the fungus needs to fruit. That is not a range an ant would ever care about. An ant has no reason to prefer one leaf 10 inches up over another leaf 20 inches up. But the fungus does, because its own growth and spore release depend on temperature and moisture staying inside tight limits. So the ant is not climbing to a height that means anything to the ant. She is climbing to a height that means everything to the fungus, and she is measuring it with a body she no longer controls. And when she reaches it, she does the one thing that makes all of this irreversible. Around solar noon, on a schedule that is synchronized across many infected ants at once, she opens her jaws, sets them onto the vein on the underside of a leaf, and bites down. And then the jaws lock, and they do not open again. This is called the death grip, and it is not a figure of speech. The muscles that close those jaws go into a final contraction and are then, in effect, destroyed in place, so that even after she dies, the grip does not release. The fungus has spent part of its investment to weld the ant to the exact spot it needs her. She is now fixed to the leaf, at the right height, in the right air, facing the right way. And she is still, at this moment, technically alive. Notice what has just happened in accounting terms, because it is brutal and exact. The fungus has taken the single most expensive thing the ant owns, the muscles that let her feed and fight, and it has spent them permanently on one action. those jaw muscles will never work again. They were not damaged by accident. They were deliberately used up, converted from a tool the ant used every day into a bolt that fastens a corpse to a leaf. This is the moment the machine is finally allowed to stop being useful as a machine, because it has just been repurposed as a fixture. The ant has stopped being equipment and become infrastructure. And only now, with the body locked in place and going nowhere, does the fungus start doing the thing everybody thinks it was doing the whole time. Now it eats her. Now, with the grip welded shut and the position secured, it consumes the soft tissue it kept running for 3 weeks, converting muscle and organ into fungal mass at last.
It could not afford to do this earlier, because earlier the tissue had a job. The legs had to walk, the jaws had to hold, the whole animal had to climb. You do not eat the engine while the car is still driving. The long delay was never mercy, and it was never inefficiency. It was a body being kept in service until the exact instant its service was complete, and not 1 hour longer. Then, a few days after she dies, still holding the leaf, the visible part appears. And this is what the entire scheme was for. A stalk pushes out through the back of her head, grows out into the still air beneath the leaf, and forms a structure at its tip that will release spores. Those spores drift down onto the trail below, the same trail Zola used to walk, where her sisters are still moving back and forth carrying food. The height was chosen so the spores fall onto ant traffic. The leaf was chosen for the air. The whole climb, the whole death, the whole 3 weeks of quiet were logistics, arranging for a spore to be released at the one address where the next ant is guaranteed to pass underneath. And that address is the reason the colony's response makes such cold sense. A colony that finds one of these fruiting bodies near the nest treats the ground around it as contaminated and will route its trails away from it entirely. They are not mourning a lost worker, they are quarantining a site, the way you would rope off a building that is shedding something dangerous. The ant that was carried out and abandoned weeks ago and the trail that now bends around a patch of forest floor are the same decision made twice. The colony writes off the individual to protect the workforce, because one worker is replaceable and the colony is not. Now the honest part, because the popular version of this overreaches, and it is worth being exact. This fungus does not turn forests into wastelands, and it does not spread through a colony like fire. It is kept in check, hard, by the very defenses we just described. A healthy colony detects and dumps most infections early, and the fungus succeeds only at the margins, on the workers who wander far enough and stay out long enough to slip the surveillance. Most spores that land never get in. Most ants that are infected are caught and removed before the fungus finishes. So this is not an unstoppable puppet master emptying the forest. It is a slow, ancient parasite that wins a small percentage of the time against an immune system made of thousands of other ants. And that small percentage is enough because it has had 48 million years to collect on it. And there is a second honest line that matters just as much because it cuts the other way. Each of these fungi is not a general threat. It is a specialist tuned to one kind of ant, sometimes essentially one species, and it does not work well on the wrong host. An Ophiocordyceps that has spent millions of years learning to route the controls of one carpenter ant cannot simply move to a different ant and do the same thing. The manipulation is that finely fitted to that one body's wiring. So what looks like a single monstrous power is actually thousands of separate, narrow contracts, each one written for exactly one kind of machine
and useless against any other. Which means the fungus is trapped by its own precision, and this is the cost on its side of the ledger that nobody notices. It has built the most exact takeover in nature, and the price of that exactness is that it cannot survive without this particular ant. If this ant species declines, the fungus tuned to it does not simply hop to another, it goes with it. Its habitat is not the forest. Its habitat is one species' body, and one species' body can be lost.
The parasite that seems to hold all the power in this story is in fact the more fragile of the two, because the ant colony can lose Zola and continue, and the fungus cannot lose the ants and continue at all. So the ledger for these 3 weeks comes out very differently from how it looks. The colony lost one worker out of tens of thousands, detected the danger, and bent its trails around the contaminated ground. For the colony, this is a rounding error. It already knows how to survive. The ant, Zola, spent the last 2 days of her life climbing to a place she had no reason to go, welding her own jaws to a leaf, and being eaten from the inside in a fixed position in the light. Everything she was built to do was spent, at the end, on holding still. And the fungus spent 20 days of careful, expensive restraint, keeping a body alive that it was slowly consuming, all to move a spore from the floor to a leaf 10 inches up. 2 days of the ant's death against a lifetime of the ant's work, against millions of years of the fungus getting the timing exactly right. They did not fight. There was no struggle at any point that anyone could have watched. The most complete takeover of one animal by another on this planet happens with no violence at all, in an ant that keeps working, keeps grooming, keeps following the trail, while the ownership of its body quietly changes hands over 3 weeks. It is not a predator and prey. It is a slow transfer of a working asset from the animal that built it to the organism that learned to run it more cheaply than building its own. Everything that looks like a disease here is actually a business, and the ant is not the victim of an illness. She is a machine that changed hands and kept running the whole time so that the new owner would not lose a day of use. And here is what happens next, because the trail below that leaf did not go away. The colony has routed around the fruiting body, but the forest is full of leaves, and the fungus does not need this colony to fail. It only needs a few workers every season to wander far enough and stay out long enough. There is another forager out on the far edge of the trail right now, half a mile from the nest, working alone in exactly the conditions the colony's defenses cannot reach. She feels nothing land on her back. There is nothing to feel. It weighs almost nothing, and it has all the time it has always had, and the 20-day clock has just started again on an ant that will go on working tonight as if the day were entirely her own.